Okay, this is the title, Some Fundamentals of Animal Training. Okay, about myself, consider myself a behavioral technologist. I believe I am a behavioral scientist. I try to be. I am not a clicker trainer. I am not a balanced trainer, whatever that is. I use what works. I usually use reinforcement, and I rarely use punishment. The mechanics, the technology is all the same. It's how you vary, how you change the application of the mechanics. It's adapting to the animal you're working with, whether it's alpacas, whether it's lizards, or snakes, or fish, or dogs, dolphins, whatever. The mechanics might vary a little bit, but the technology is the same. What you apply is the same, regardless of what you're training. I'm not here to tell you how to train animals. I'm not going to get into the specifics of how to train animals. So many people have wanted to have demonstrations. They go to seminars to have demonstrations of how to train. And I didn't bring any aardvarks, dogs, vultures, or this is one shot here of one of the very early lizards that I trained. And the lizard was trained to press a paddle. And after the paddle was pressed, I delivered a lizard, a little Xanthusia vigilus, which is a little yucca night lizard, which is rather small. And as I've said here, the collared lizard liked it, but the night lizard didn't care for it so much. Later on, I found that I was able to make a change and actually improve the behavior, improve the value, increase the value of the little lizard. I found that I could put the little lizard inside of a .410 shotgun shell. I could deliver the lizard just in the shotgun shell, just drop it into the aquarium, the terrarium where this was located. And this is a collared lizard, by the way. Right here is a collared lizard. The collared lizard would look for the shotgun shell and run over to it and stand there and wait. And wait and wait until pretty soon the little Xanthusia's little head would come out a little further and a little further and a little further. And there were a number of times where the lizard would look up like this and I guess see what was out there. Anyway, as you can see, the mountain boomer is another name for this lizard. Managed to get this lizard. How many of you have seen Jurassic Park? Okay, you saw the accountant sitting on the john inside the building that was knocked over and looking up at the lizard, and the lizard was looking down at the accountant. Well, that's kind of what it looked like here. The important thing to me was the fact that instead of dropping the little lizard onto a dish, it was usually a mayonnaise jar lid, that I put it inside this shell, and the lizard actually worked faster for this yucca night lizard in the shotgun shell than just dropped on that. I could get faster behavior. It was the process of getting the yucca night lizard, I believe. Now, I don't have extensive data on this. I didn't do it that many times, a few hundred times perhaps, but it was always very clear during those times that the lizard would work harder for a little lizard in the shotgun shell. The important thing is, same reinforcement supposedly, but what did I do? I changed the environment a bit. I changed the contingencies were the same. You're going to get this lizard, but I've added something to it. You have to work a little bit to get it. And somehow the process of getting this lizard out of the shotgun shell added to the value. So think about that in your training. You can change the value of the reinforcer by making certain subtle changes. So animal trainers tend to think a lot about animal behavior. Like a killer whale like this, you think about what the animal is doing. Perhaps you should think a bit about trainer behavior. Usually it's the trainer's behavior that really counts more than anything else. What do you do in response to what the animal does? How do you arrange the contingencies for the animal? And what do you do in response to the animal's behavior? I am here to talk about simplifying behavior, simplifying training. Some people look for complex training. I look to simplify training. That has been always our general rule. What can we do to simplify things? So often I hear the animal is thinking, or what is the animal thinking? I do not know what this animal is thinking, and neither does anyone else. As I say here, I'm not always sure what I'm thinking. How can I know for sure what the animal is thinking? Relationships and hierarchies. There's big issues that are made about relationships and hierarchies. I'm not saying they're not important. I'm not going to discuss it. I'm not going to get into the issues of hierarchies and relationships. As I say here, I've never alpha rolled chickens, and I sure as heck have not tried to manhandle a killer whale. Thoughts? I don't know what the animal is thinking, as I've said before. I'm not sure what I'm thinking part of the time. And I haven't found anyone who can use the Vulcan mind meld. Tricks and gimmicks, and there are tricks to training. And many of you know a lot of tricks, probably many more than I do, having to do with dogs, particularly in agility training and obedience and the like. But when I teach animal training, I teach you have to earn it. No cutting corners. You get it the hard way. You earn it. Okay, we're not going to get into my doggy did this, my doggy did that. What do? I don't know what your doggy did, and I don't know why your doggy did it. Okay, I'm going to talk about the fundamentals of changing behavior, and that is the fundamentals, and I'll get into what are the fundamentals. What is a fundamental? It's about animal behavior, human behavior. This little baby right here is in a Skinner box. And the little baby, can you see the button the baby is pushing? It's really pushing on this button. Those are little lights in front of the baby. Why is the little baby pressing the button? To change the lights. It likes the flashing lights. No food, there's no M&Ms or a little milk bottle coming down or anything like that. All it wants to see is the changing of the environment. The flashing lights is sufficient to maintain the pushing of the button. If you stop moving these lights, the baby will stop pressing the button. This work was done by Ogden Lindsley many years ago in the 50s and early 60s. It's about trainer behavior. We're going to talk about trainer behavior because it's your behavior that gets the behavior from the animal. It's changing your behavior that's going to allow you to more rapidly, better able to change the behavior of the animal you're working with, whatever it is. So many people expect the animal to be the only one to change its behavior. You need to change your behavior in order to get the animal to change its behavior. If what you're working doesn't work, hasn't been working, what should you do? Change your behavior. Find out what you have to do, and we'll be talking a bit about that. What is animal training? What does it do? How do we do it? And when do we do it? What are the origins of animal training? They're probably very old. This picture, this drawing was on a wall about 1500 BC. So animal training, and I think you would guess from this that these dogs have been trained. Not very nice, but nonetheless, the dogs have been trained to do what they're doing. So animal training have been around for a long time. This is not a new thing. Now, some of you may feel animal training is relatively new and clicker training is brand new. We'll get into that in a little bit. Skinner actually combined science and behavior in the 1930s. Now, prior to that, there are some people who have approached it, particularly Watson and some others. Modern training began in the 1940s. I am suggesting one definition, one description of animal training is, what do we have? You look at the animal, what does the animal just do? And then we say, what do we want? And training is that pathway that leads us from what we already have, what this animal exhibits, to what we want. If you don't see what this animal has, if you're not paying enough attention to know what the animal has to give you, or if you don't know what you want, how can you train the animal? You don't know from whence you started, and you don't know where you're going. You need to define where you're going, and you need to look at the animal to see what you have. So often trainers don't take the time to do that. They just start to train. And gradually, over a period of time, they finally decide what they want. And that's a very inefficient way of changing behaviors. Training may be making it worthwhile for the animal to play our silly little games, to me, is a big point. Now, we may feel that this behavior that we want this animal to do is very important. Why should the animal feel that it's important? Why? What about it, what about the behavior that you want makes it important? Out in the jungle or wherever this animal comes from, it probably doesn't run around running over A-frames or running through tunnels or the like to be timed. It goes through some brush maybe, but it doesn't very often go through weave poles that way. You make it worthwhile. You make it worthwhile for this animal to do what you want it to do. It's up to you. Don't expect this animal to do it because of love for you. You make it worthwhile for the animal to do it. And remember, it's our silly little game, not the animals. There are a number of you out there who have been to the chicken workshops. We made it worthwhile for those animals to look at those colored objects, or those circles, triangles, and squares, or whatever it was that we had the animal discriminating. Those animals would not have particularly looked for circles, triangles, and squares out in the jungle. It would not have paid off very well. And if those circles and triangles and squares, remember how big they were, that'd probably frighten the animal. If there's an insect that big walking along, they probably wouldn't have a lot to do with it. So, and also, remember that many of the animals that you work with, the dogs, that adapt so well to what we want, they would not work very well out in nature because they are too adaptable to us. They're too docile towards us. They're not looking to the environment for change, they're looking to you. But you have made yourself, hopefully, the most important thing there, so it's worthwhile for the animal to change its behavior for you, not just to change the environment, its environment, but to do the things that you want it to do, to go over the A-frame, to go through the tunnel, as opposed to finding something out there good to eat. Okay, a trainer's definition of training might be a mechanical skill. Using hand-eye coordination, and that's important, hand-eye coordination and methodology, regardless of the methodology. There's just a way that you do it, including procedures and rules to teach or change behavior. That's the key, to teach or change behavior. So, animal training is a mechanical skill. Some people get upset about saying that animal training is a mechanical skill. However, I point out to you that neurosurgery is a mechanical skill. And if you had the choice between two neurosurgeons, one has spent the last 5 years reading every book out there and actually spending time on the internet reading, how to do neurosurgery, how to open up a skull and work on a brain. Now, they have spent 5 years doing this, reading about it, but they have never opened up a head in their lives. And you have another surgeon who has spent the last 5 years doing it. What would be your choice? Who would be your choice? What neurosurgeon would you choose? Obviously, the one who's done it. Training is a mechanical skill, and that does not mean that you don't have to think while you're doing it. It means that you have to translate what you have in your mind to your hands. That's the key. What you have in your mind, translate it to your hands, that's what you do. That's how you change behavior. Golfing is a mechanical skill. As I point out, Tiger Woods probably does not spend a lot of time reading Golfer's Digest to develop his golf swing. He plays golf, swings. So animal training is a mechanical skill. Animal training is decisions, decisions, decisions. This is a game where you had better be prepared to make decisions. Not only that, is if you make a wrong decision, that you're prepared to move on to the next decision without agony, changing your behavior hopefully so you don't make that same wrong decision again. But the decisions come at you time after time after time. In a training session, you're going to be making dozens of decisions rapidly. And once you've made it, you can't take it back. It's already done. I suggest to you that you treat every decision as if it stepped off a curb and was hit by a Mack truck. It's gone. That decision is past you. You can't take it back. You can't change anything. It's dead. Try again. Hopefully it'll be a better decision. Or if it was a good decision, you're not going to spend a lot of time bragging to yourself, oh, how wonderful I am, because guess what's behind it? What's coming right after it? Another decision. And you might screw this one all up while you're patting yourself on the back. Keep moving. Make the decision, move on. Make the decision, move on. Animal training can be a science, technology, and art. And as I say here, I believe the less art to it, the better. But I also point out that you have two organisms, both with agendas, and there's always going to be an art to it. When you have two organisms interacting and each have a certain degree of freedom, it's going to be an art. Your challenge is to make it more of a technology, a reproducible technology, something you can teach someone else, and less art. It's tough to teach art to somebody. You can teach somebody how to use the brush. This is how you stroke and the like, but how do you create something like Rembrandt created? That comes from somewhere else. But you can teach how to stroke with a brush. Animal training should be, I believe, either fun or profitable, one or the other. And, gee, if it's really, really nice, it'll be both. It'd be really nice to have a lot of fun at what you do and have it be profitable, right? I believe Clicker training is the safest training method for novice trainers. And I've heard this time after time, clicker training is forgiving. Well, it's forgiving if you're a casual trainer. It's not forgiving if you want precision. It's no more forgiving than anything else. What you click is what you get. If you really want good behavior, precise behavior, that means that you click precisely. You think about what you're doing and you don't treat it casually. If you're there to have a good time, or you're teaching a class of pet owners that all you want them to do is to get the dog's butt to hit the ground, then that's what you want to teach. Don't worry that much about the precision. It's up to you to set the levels of precision required. Okay, I believe that novice trainers should not use punishment. That is the biggest complaint I have with the people who are using what I guess is called compulsion training, is they start right off the bat punishing the animal, using the leash jerks. And I think that's a mistake, because the student is not observant enough and their mechanical skills are not good enough to use punishment yet. I'm not saying that punishment can never be used or should never be used, but it should not be used by novices. And I believe severe aversive should only be used by experienced people. Punishment, carefully controlled and administered, may have a role in training. But again, remember what I said about novices. That isn't the first thing they should learn how to do. What is behavior? Anything an organism does. Walking, swimming, flying, eating, drinking, sitting, biting, licking, mating, thinking, digesting, metabolizing, blinking, circulating blood, speaking, writing, and, of course, attending seminars. That's behavior. This gets into the realm of as much biology as psychology and animal training. I believe what an animal does, the behavior that it goes through, is as important to its survival as the physical characteristics. It's not just what the animal has, it's how it uses it. And remember, animals have been behaving for 1 billion years. They've been behaving, they've been doing things. Animals didn't just start behaving last week or 1,000 years ago. They have been behaving for 1 billion years. Animal trainers did not invent behavior. Remember that, folks. You did not invent this. You didn't. All you do is observe and you change it. That's all you do. You didn't invent it. It wasn't created for you. Nature was doing this long before we were here. The complex process called biological evolution has influenced changes in animal behavior gradually over a period of time for lots of reasons that I won't get into. That has animals changed physically, their behavior has changed. Have some humility, folks. Animals have been changing their behavior 1 billion years before anybody ever invented the clicker. So that clicker is not a magic way of changing behavior. Animals were changing their behavior a long time before that. My question to you is, what took you so long to discover how to do it? What took me so long to find out the best way that I know of to train the animals? That should be your question. Why am I so slow at it? I know this animal can learn this quickly because nature has designed this animal as a learning machine. And yet, it still takes time to train this animal. And it's because of me, not because of the animal. Now, there are certainly more difficult behaviors that we teach, but the vast majority of behaviors that we teach are relatively simple. If any of you were to go out in nature and watch the complex behavioral patterns that occur in nature, you would be amazed that you're asking this much of this animal's capability. That's all you're asking. And yet it takes you so long to get it. It takes me so long to get it. And that's because you don't do it right. You don't communicate clearly enough to the animal how to do it. And that's what you need to develop in yourself, a better way of communicating to this animal precisely what you want. Not approximately, and you don't just let this animal figure it out for itself. Now I see so often on the internet that you want to create the thinking animal. What have I already said? The animal is already thinking. The animal is not thinking about what you want it to think about. That's the only problem. It's up to you to communicate clearly to the animal what you want. And the more you're able to do this, the more you're able to communicate this to the animal, the more this animal will pay attention to you. So don't let this animal flounder around trying to approximate the behaviors that you want. Arrange it so the animal is successful. And the more success the animal has, the more it's going to pay attention to you and begin to solve your problems because you have made it worthwhile for the animal to do that. Again, when you see on the internet, I've taught this animal to think now. It's a thinking animal. What was it before? Empty-headed? No. What we have done is made it more worthwhile for the animal to think about what we want it to think about. That's all. Two kinds of behavior, involuntary and voluntary. Now that's at the extremes. Remember I've said the extremes. You have reflexes or respondent behaviors and voluntary or learned or operant behaviors at the extremes. So respondent conditioning is one form of learning. Operant conditioning or behavior analysis is another form of learning. The distinction, the real distinction between the two is blurred, and it's getting more blurred as we get more and more information on the nervous system. I won't go into that in this class, but I've talked about the extreme. They're getting closer and closer and closer together as we study in the laboratory more and more about these kinds of behaviors. All behavior begins with some innate behavior. All behavior, it begins somewhere. You can tie it into something that the animal was born with. It just came with the animal. The animal's built that way. Reflex, mostly smooth muscles and the like. This is something that most of you know very well. The reflex is involuntary behavior. Now, I really won't get into the definition of a reflex. Most people misunderstand what a reflex actually is, but I'm going to say, like everybody else does, reflex is a response. It's really not. But it's a relationship between a stimulus and a response. So reflexes take care of all those things that we tend not to think about, but it's things that we all do, and the animal does also. Dear old Pavlov. Remember his experiment? The dog that salivated, and he found out that the animal salivated before the experiment, and he started tying the response into new signals. Anyway, he was a physiologist, not a psychologist, and he won a Nobel Prize for all of this work. So you take a natural stimulus and you get a response, and then you combine the natural stimulus and the neutral stimulus, getting the same response. And if you do this often enough, pretty soon, by giving what was a neutral stimulus, could be a bell, it could be whatever sound or whatever object would be displayed, that you get the same response. Pavlov actually found this would be the case when they began to harness the animal in a totally separate room. The animal began to salivate. And he hadn't even given any meat powder or lemon juice or anything to the animal. That's what led him to do the later experiments. We have the neutral stimulus, which is a bell. If you had rung the bell before the experiment, the bell doesn't mean anything at all to the dog. By the time you finish pairing the bell with giving the animal meat powder or lemon juice, and the animal salivates with the lemon juice and the meat powder, that the ringing of the bell is enough to cause the animal to salivate. Everyone remember that. Okay. We were fortunate enough to have visit us Horsley Gant. He's a physiologist and he was Pavlov's last graduate student. And he was very interested in the work that we had going on to the farm because he said this, as far as he could see, was the first time anybody really combined the operant and respondent experiments on a practical level. And he was very interested in what we were doing. Reflexes tend to be very simple, they tend to be stereotyped, and they are very stimulus and response specific. One blink looks like another blink. One jerk of your arm or your leg is just like another jerk of the arm or the leg. And it is maintained by natural selection. In other words, nature built it that way. And if it wasn't that way in nature, we would die, or the animals would die. Now, one thing, and one reason why I discuss this at some length, you're going to hear people say to you or say elsewhere, if you talk about, I use operant conditioning, they say, oh, the stimulus response conditioning. What is operant conditioning? Is it really stimulus response? No, it's not. That is respondent conditioning. That's Pavlovian conditioning. We're going to talk about operant conditioning in just a little bit. But if somebody says stimulus response conditioning, and this person is important to you, they're explaining to someone else the work that you do, and they say stimulus response conditioning, you need to speak up and say, no, it's not. That's much simpler than operant conditioning. The outcomes are much more set in respondent conditioning. That's what led some people astray, and I'll talk about Watson in a little bit. They began using respondent conditioning to explain all behavior, and it didn't work, did it? I mean, it flat didn't work. And that's because there's no specific stimulus that makes us go to a movie. I'm going to go to a movie. Well, what do? I bang myself on the head? Or what do I do to make myself want to go to the movie? Or go to the movie? So it's the experience of going to the movie that's pretty good. You know, I really enjoyed that. The consequence was I enjoyed it, so what am I going to do? I'm going to go to a movie again. But that's not stimulus response. Some behavior combines the characteristics of voluntary and involuntary. Fixed action or just action patterns. That is kind of in between the operant behaviors and respondent behaviors. It's a series of specific actions, and there's a very common one of these fixed action patterns. What is it? We all do it every day. Walking. For those of us who are able to walk, we walk. That's a fixed action pattern. Do you actually think about how you walk? Do you think I've got to lift my leg up, put it forward, and take a step, and shift my balance? And, in other words, go through this whole process in your mind. Do we? No. Is it a respondent behavior? Is it a stimulus? Is there something that goes bang to the head and makes you take a step? No. It's in between. It is something that once we start doing it, we say walk. And our body takes over and does the walk. It's a very characteristic walk. If you go to downtown LA or downtown New York City or downtown Chicago and look at some of the gang walks, what do you see? You know, all of these struts and the like that are characteristic. You look right down the road and everybody's walking the same way. Is it the way that you folks tend to walk? No, it's not. Because they have modified this fixed action pattern. They have changed it. Beginning when they were little, they modeled this behavior, they saw it, and approval. They got approval from others by walking this way. So in this way, they were reinforced for walking this way. Now they're 24 or 25 and they want to go out and get a job. They want to join the real world. They have a problem. And that's the reason I'm spending some time on this. They have a problem, don't they? What does it take to change a fixed action pattern? It has become almost an innate behavior. It is very, very tough. It takes so much to change this innate behavior. It came out as an innate behavior to walk. We walk. But they modified it. And then over a period of time, it became essentially like a respondent behavior, like an innate behavior. If they say walk, without thinking about it, their whole body starts assuming all of these positions. Now they want to change it. Now, what does this have to do with you? You have been training your dog to go over an A-frame in a particular way and at high speed. Bang, he's going over this at a high rate of speed. Okay, what is the running of a dog? It's a fixed action pattern, isn't it? Okay, we spend the next 6 months training this dog to run over this A-frame in a particular way, and then we say, gee, really, that's not right. I really should not have done this. And you could have even had suspicions earlier because, doggone, I'm getting more out of contact zone running. The dog is making more errors on the run. But until I find out how to change, I'll just keep, I need to do something. So I'll keep training this until I come up with a better way. What do you think of that idea? Bad, bad, bad. Why? You're developing a fixed action pattern. As soon as you detect or even are suspicious that there's something wrong with what you are doing when you're dealing with a fixed action pattern, what should you do? Stop what you're doing immediately. Go contemplate your navel or do something else other than train this dog to run over the A-frame this way. Decide in your mind what this dog has to do that's different and go back and start training that. Stop what you're doing. And I have seen so often people rehearsing things that they don't want because they don't know what else to do. And they would rather do that than nothing at all. But of course, nothing at all is what they really should be doing until they finally decide what they should be doing. Okay, I've already said the action pattern may be modified, but they're difficult to eliminate. You can change them. The longer you rehearse them, the more difficult they are to change. So, there are stages, there are levels of difficulty of changing behavior. The reflex is the hardest to change, and the response is almost impossible to change. Not quite, but almost. That is, you have this response to hitting the nerve here, stimulating the jerk. Well, I want to hit this, but I want the leg to go the other direction. That's pretty tough to do because it's not built that way. Fixed action patterns are the next most difficult to change, and then you have the simple muscular action, the thing that we normally do. And that's the easiest to change. And that's what we work with mostly. And I say mostly, I'm not so sure in cases like fly ball and a lot of agility training, some of agility training, but a lot of agility training, you're dealing a lot with fixed action patterns. We have operants, motor actions that operate on the environment. And that is what most of the time we are in, most working with animals. That's mostly what we work with, operants. So motor actions are changed through operant conditioning. Reflexes are changed through respondent conditioning. And for all practical purposes, and for animal trainers, the extreme of operant and respondent behaviors lie on the ends of a continuum. So you've got operant, supposedly pure operant out here, supposedly pure respondent here, and there is a continuum. Now, this leads to long discussions on the internet and between trainers about whether a behavior is operant or respondent. Well, now, discussions are very nice, especially if you're in a bar somewhere. That's fun, it provides conversation and the like. But to invest heavily over the hours trying to argue whether it's operant or respondent, it's a waste of time. When you get towards, the further you get to the extremes, the easier it is to tell what it appears to be, operant or respondent. But don't waste a lot of time discussing whether it is. Your challenge is to change it. Of course, the more respondent that it is, what does that say about your ability to change it? Becomes less. You have less ability to change it the closer it gets to the respondent. No matter what the trainer does, an animal will have one overriding objective in its mind, and that is what? Survival. It wants to stay alive. Whatever, if something threatens its existence, it's going to respond to that. It has its agenda to live. The animal will do whatever is necessary to protect itself. We train operant behavior using operant conditioning, but Pavlov is always on your shoulder. The meaning of that really is you've got Skinner on one shoulder, Pavlov on another shoulder, watching your training all the time. And it's the balance between the two that is going to get you the behavior that you want. The smaller Pavlov is and the larger Skinner is, the more of this operant behavior you're going to get. The animal is going to be in a better mode to be learning to change its behavior because it's not worried about its survival. Now, I am actually giving a bum rap to Pavlov because Pavlov also described, even though it's not mentioned very often in the literature, good feelings. In other words, good things happening to the animal, those are also Pavlovian, but we really don't talk too much about that. Usually it's a matter of the animal's afraid, scared. We frighten the animal either because of environmental circumstances, past experience. You see something on the wall that is something that to the animal caused it pain or frightened the animal, and therefore the animal responds untowards towards it, turns around and runs away. Pavlov becomes huge. What happened to Skinner? Skinner shrunk and is almost not there. What is your chances of changing the behavior using food and targeting? And you have lessened your chances of changing behavior because Pavlov now is so big. Your challenge now is to get the animal calm, accepting of the circumstance, feed the animal finally a little bit, and it's finally begin to take some food. Pavlov gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Now you're ready to make Skinner bigger and bigger and bigger. So if you think of it that way, with Skinner on one shoulder, Pavlov on the other shoulder, and your challenge is to make the dog very happy. The circumstance is a good learning circumstance, and you're going to get more change of behavior when the animal is responding well to Skinnerian conditioning, operant conditioning. If the animal is afraid, then the animal is not going to learn very much, is going to run away. Now, you all know this, but so often we tend to forget about it, and we think of it in terms of absolute. The animal is not terrified. I mean, he's not drooling or cowering in a corner, and yet the animal is tense and not responding well. We don't recognize that that is Pavlov being big and Skinner being small. We don't take the time to calm the animal down and let Skinner grow so that the animal is going to be better able to respond. If you have an animal that's afraid, you have cut down the rate of learning. Those of us who have worked with animals in open environments, free-flying birds, dolphins, or whatever, we face that all the time. And you've got to work very, very hard because you really can't control the environment very much there, can you? So you teach the animal to adapt to more and more levels of stress in the environment. And there, by reinforcing the animal, you make Pavlov smaller because the animal is willing to accept more and lets Skinner grow in size. Operant conditioning. This is what we work with mostly. And what we have here, you have a response. Now, there may be something that triggers the response, or it may be something the animal just does, and we have no idea why the animal did it. But the results of that response that the animal gives you, that piece of behavior, the consequence, the results, is something that the animal likes. Or, well, let's leave it at likes right now. The animal likes it. What is the likelihood this animal is going to do that behavior again? You've increased it. The probability increases that the animal will do this. Now, there's lots of arguments that go on. Is this really the case? And the like. For practical purposes, for what we do in the trenches, if you look at it that way, then it will do the job for you. If you're on a list of behavior analysts, people who do this for a living and they teach it in the universities, they start quibbling over fine points. For our purposes, the animal likes what's going on, you get more of it. The animal doesn't like what's going on, guess what? You're not going to get more of it, you get less of it. Okay? That's called operant conditioning. It's the consequence that governs whether or not you're going to get more of that behavior. The more favorable the consequence to the animal, the more likely the response will reoccur. And again, it may have an obvious stimulus that has triggered, you can see, this happens and then I get this response and this a consequence occurs and then we get this signal again and immediately the response occurs. Or it could be just the animal does it and you have no idea why the animal did it. Now there's probably something that triggered it, we just don't know what it was. So operant conditioning is a field of psychology dealing in behavior and its consequences. Now, Skinner was not one for theories. You will hear often people talking about the theory of operant conditioning. Skinner would say he didn't have any theory of operant conditioning. It's a description. And from that he concluded that if you do something that the animal likes, he doesn't call it that now, I'm saying for our purposes, he has reinforced the behavior he says he has reinforced the behavior because the rate of behavior increases. It's functionally defined, as they say, as the behavior analysts say, that if the rate of behavior increases, it's being reinforced. If the rate of behavior declines, it's not being reinforced. It's that simple. And it is simple. It can get very complex on the application of this, but the functional definition is very simple. Behaviorism began in the early 1900s with John Watson, as I already mentioned. He did some things with rats and people and scared some people, and this poor kid was afraid of anything white afterwards and the like. But anyway, he tried to develop an entire field of psychology based on Pavlovian conditioning. He discovered Pavlov. He read Pavlov and says, aha, that explains human behavior. But as I said before, what is that stimulus that makes me go to a movie? And I don't know of that stimulus. And this is, of course, just an example of where Watson fell short. But what Watson did do is say, if we're going to describe behavior and its effects, if we're going to describe behavior, then quit looking inside the skull. Look at behavior. Study behavior. If you want to learn about behavior, you need to study behavior. So he is considered the father of behaviorism because he said study behavior. He, as I've said here, he used mostly respondent conditioning, and it went up a blind alley because they found that it couldn't explain enough of human behavior or even most animal behavior. It just wasn't good enough. Operant conditioning began with Fred Skinner in the 1930s. The book was Behavior of Organisms. Now, Skinner is called a neo-behaviorist, a new behaviorist, because he also studied behavior, but a different aspect of it. Now, there are other behaviorists, neo-behaviorists, and I guess I don't describe them here. Clark Hull and some others are also neo-behaviorists, but they studied it or tried to study it on a theoretical level. They didn't measure behavior the way Skinner did, and that's why we remember Skinner so well, and these other people have just disappeared because they did not study behavior in the scientific manner that Skinner did. When you read literature, the really old stuff, Skinner's time, they'll call it operant conditioning. Now they call it behavior analysis. As far as I'm concerned, you can use the terms synonymously, even though they are not true synonyms. Behavior analysis covers more. It's operant plus respondent. It allows them to describe much more behavior and allows for species variation and lots of other things. It's just more inclusive. But as far as I'm concerned, you can use the same term for both. The ABCs of behavior analysis. Antecedents, behavior, and consequences. It's simple enough, and it's your task as a trainer to really analyze each of these to be sure you understand what's going on. That's the basic analysis, the ABCs. What do we mean by antecedents? I've got it up here, but what does it really mean? Everything that went on before. It can be a stimulus, it can be the SD that we're, or the cue that we're providing, okay. What about the genetics? The genetics of the animal, that's an antecedent. That came before the behavior. What about any experience the animal has had up to this point? Is that an antecedent? Of course it is. All of these things are antecedent. It's whatever went on before, and it isn't just the cue. So often people stop at the cue. It is whatever went on before. Everything, all of the animal's experiences Anything that went on before the behavior is an antecedent. Cues are important, and what we try to do, what you should be trying to do, is making the cue one of the most, if not the most important antecedent. You make it so big, this is what the animal is going to respond to. You try very hard to make this important to the animal. That means that your cue should be distinctive or unique among stimuli, have strong attention-getting properties, and not be used for anything else. You have, I'm sure, all seen this already. What happens if we don't know the animal's antecedent, the antecedents of that particular animal? We can ask the animal, and how do we ask the animal? We provide something for the animals to respond to and see what happens. How does the animal respond to changes in the environment? We do this, what does the animal do? We do that, what does the animal do? And in that way, we begin to ask questions. You ask the animal, but you can do more than just watch. You can subtly begin to change the environment in certain ways and get responses on the part of the animal. You can test the animal for reactivity, can't you? And some animals are highly reactive and some are not so reactive. You can use balloons in your work. Ordinary balloons, floating balloons, you know the balloons, filled with hydrogen or helium and just floating around. If you want to test reactivity, and the beautiful part about it is you can vary the stimulus by doing what? By having the balloon less filled or more filled. It can be lying on the ground just as a blob there. Doesn't do much of anything. But now it gets a little bit higher, a little bit higher, and then it moves a little bit like this. A very cheap way of providing a lot of stimulation to this animal, and you can control it precisely because the animal does well with one balloon, and you can let it finally go up higher and higher into the air, and there it is. And at one point, you paint a face on it. Wow! All of a sudden, this balloon becomes something totally different to the many animals, depending on what? The antecedents. What has gone on before, and that includes genetics. It could be that this animal is just highly reactive. It has a very active nervous system. But you do this with a simple balloon. Cheap. Now, you've done it with one balloon, and now you turn a fan on in the corner. This balloon has just been floating there in the air. Now you turn a fan on, what's this balloon going to do? It's going to move all over the place. And wow! Either you get a reaction or you don't. But depending on the speed of the fan, it moves a little bit, and pretty soon the animal calms down. Well, it's okay, I'm not being hurt. Can you see how we can begin to adapt this animal to this? And what do we do after one balloon? 2 balloons, 3 balloons, 4 balloons, until the room is filled with balloons moving all over the place. And we did that, folks. This is you've heard about our cats, the cat guidance. This is one of the ways we adapted the cats to movement. We had these balloons floating all over the place. And how much labor did it take? And yet we got lots of interaction, lots of stimulation for the animal, cheap. Just a suggestion. It's a great way. It works very well. B, behavior. And that's whatever occurs. Hopefully what you wanted. But it's going to be a behavior. Something is going to happen. And I talk here about responses and the like. I'm not going to go into definition of responses. But you're looking at analyzing each piece of that behavior. The animal is going to give you something usually. And it may be what you want. It may not be what you want. If it's not what you want, what was it? How does it differ from what you want? And what do you have to do you believe, based on what you see, in order to get more of what you want and less of what you don't want, simply based on the analysis of the behavior. You want the animal to go forward, but instead, because of reactivity, the animal backs up. What are you going to have to do? Probably reduce the power of that stimulus. The animal's afraid of it. The animal is not going to come forward, so you have to reduce the level in order for the animal to come forward. These are the things you have to do as the trainer when you analyze the behavior. C is for consequences. What are the consequences? Something good, something bad, nothing at all. Usually it's about that simple. Sometimes you can't quite tell, but usually if you have arranged your circumstances, your situation, you can pick out very quickly whether it is something good, whether the animal has accepted this as something good. In other words, the result is something good for the animal. It increases the rate of behavior. Something bad, which means you're going to get less of the behavior, or nothing at all, which means nothing changes. It stays the same. Every behavior analysis, I believe, every behavioral intervention, I believe, every training plan, I believe, should include antecedents, behavior, consequences. Anytime you have a behavioral plan, and that means your training session, you should evaluate what has gone on before, because you might say, oops, I'm asking for too much. Based on the antecedents, I'm asking for too much. Based on the behavior last time, I'm asking for too much because I'm getting less behavior. So you've got to change your behavior, not ask for so much. And then the consequences, you have to arrange the consequences to make it, depending on what you want, either good, bad, or nothing at all. You can, if nothing at all, it might be a matter of extinguishing behavior that way. If it is something bad, what are you usually doing? It's an aversive. And as I've said before, there are circumstances where aversives are justified, and that if you're skilled, if you have already practiced the fundamentals, you know what you're doing, then it's allowed. But if you're constantly using or frequently using behavior, let's say bad consequences to change behavior, what does that say about your training? I don't believe it's very good. That should be a rare instance, and usually not to get behavior, but to suppress behavior. Basic principles of operant conditioning are fundamental processes, and they can't be subdivided or broken down into simpler processes. They can be combined to give you other processes, other ways of affecting behavior. Here are the fundamentals, and it's really as simple as what you see here. These are the accepted fundamentals of operant conditioning or behavior analysis. Skinner himself did not come up with these. It was later researchers, later people who were using this that came up with these. Now, Skinner recognized all of these and described all of these, but he didn't really put them into this neat package that we routinely use. So what do we mean? Stimulation, reinforcement, extinction, generalization, and aversives. What do we mean by these terms? First, stimulation. And it's really this simple, folks. Animals respond to stimuli. Something happens in the environment and the animal can perceive it, the animal can respond to it. If the animal cannot perceive it, is it a stimulus? No, it's not. If the animal is not able in any way, shape, or form to perceive this, if you present an infrared signal that this animal can't perceive, then it's not a stimulus. So don't say that you're providing this signal, an ultrasonic signal to this human being, and expect it to be a stimulus. because by the definition, ultrasonic signal is beyond the level of human hearing. It has to be within the range of the animal. So animals respond to stimuli. That is just a natural thing. That is a definition of life. Animals, anything living, responds to stimuli in some way, shape, or form. And remember, responses may be learned or instinctive. Responses to the stimulation may be something that has been learned, or it may be something that is just coming out within the animal. It is something built into the animal. And responses to the stimulation may change with maturation or circumstances. What do I mean by that? Consider this. You've got a 2-month-old male intact dog. A bitch in heat walks into the room. What is that little dog, little puppy going to do? Not a thing. Now we have a 4-year-old intact male, experienced, and this female walks in heat, walks into the room. What do you think might happen with this male dog? There might be a change in his behavior. Now, what do I mean by maturation? Something that happens with time and the development of an animal, the natural development of an animal. So stimulation isn't just the stimulation coming in from the environment, it's the animal's ability to respond to it. A 2-month-old puppy does not have the ability to respond appropriately or inappropriately, does not respond the way that a 4-year-old male would respond. You might not think that the 4-year-old male is being appropriate, at least under the circumstances. Okay. Remember, the animal can learn any signal can serve as a cue. Any stimulus can serve as a cue. If it is paired up, if the animal has learned that this cue, this signal means something, this animal can respond to it in a certain way, depending on, remember the ABCs. The animal can learn many cues. In other words, for most animals, they have a wide range of ability to perceive. And anywhere within that range, any one of these can serve as a cue, not just what you want. Not just what you want.